Hello and welcome to Silax, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg. And in today's episode, I talk to Skye Beck from the International School of Luxembourg. The reason I talked to him is that a couple of weeks ago I had the pleasure to participate in the Young Forscher contest, and Skye was one of the students who won one of the prestigious awards. He's going to participate in the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair in the United States, representing Luxembourg. And before he does that, I wanted to discuss with him what his research was about and see what he has to say about unbiased data. Skye actually wrote his paper about the effects of diet on cancer and angiogenesis, and this is what we will be mainly focusing our discussion on. Hello and welcome to Silax. Our guest today is Skye Beck from International School of Luxembourg. Hello, Skye.
Hello. It's great to be on here.
Today, listeners, we are having a little bit of a different episode in the sense that we're talking to an expert that is way younger than me, and sorry for mentioning that, but it's a bit stressful, I have to say, because I would prefer to be the wise and the old and whatever, but this time I'm definitely going to lean on you for a lot of different information that you're going to supply us with. But first of all, let me tell you why we are actually discussing all this today. So I met Skye, he was not aware of it, but I saw him at the contest organized by the Luxembourg Young Scientist Association. I'm going, of course, to share all the links in the show notes later on if you get interested in the association. And Skye got one of the main awards for his work. So first of all, can you tell us what your essay was about? What was your presentation about? What you've been researching?
To put it simply, I've been researching cancer, but obviously cancer is such a broad topic and such a huge field that when I was writing my paper, I really had to narrow it down because you can really go on and on and on. And so what I looked at, I chose a particular cancer. I picked liver cancer. And then I started going into a little bit of liver cancer. I started researching this, some of the causes. And then I found diet to be one of the main causes of liver cancer and cancers in general. And then finally, to narrow down my data even more, I tried to look at specific countries, especially where there was data. Now that I've had put all these pieces together, I started looking at diet and cancer. And as I was doing my research, I found one of the main parts of my paper, which was angiogenesis, which then tied in and played a big part in my paper later on. So to summarize, my papers is looking at how cancer is affected by diet and how diet also can affect angiogenesis, which then affects cancer.
So I'm sure you're already fed up with this question, but I have to answer it. Why cancer? Come on, positive thinking. You should not be interested in this terrible illness that affects many of us, and we don't want to talk about it often. We just don't want to think about it even. And you just go and say like, okay, I want to look at it. I want to look at cancer.
Yeah. Well, two reasons, actually. So the first reason is that my grandfather, he passed away. He had esophagus cancer when I was 7 years old. And obviously it was a bit of a hard time. And at the time, you probably don't exactly know as a child what cancer is. You just know, oh, he had cancer. So to be able to dedicate a paper toward one of my family members, in something that I could find out about more on what had happened to him was something interesting to me. And the other reason was that in biology, in that year, we had to write a small essay about cancer because it's part of our biology syllabus. And the essay was very minimal and there wasn't a lot talked about. So I said, whoa, this is such a big thing. Why is this only a small part of the syllabus? And so I wanted to expand on it and learn more about it.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. I actually also have some private story of cancer, like all of us do, very close in the family. And that's when you start, really researching. You want to understand, you want to know what is happening. And of course, especially when you're a child, and it was also happening to me when I was a child or a teenager or an adult, you just want to understand because the others often tend not to tell you all the truth, right? Or they kind of hide things away. So you want to know more. Okay, so you decided to narrow it down. It's also interesting, by the way, because when I went to school in a different country, so maybe that's why, but also I don't remember studying cancer at biology at all. I don't know whether now it's changed and it's the case, but it's good to know we discuss it because it's important to have some background about it. So now we are cancer, then liver cancer. And then you mentioned this word that was scary to me because I had no clue what it was when I was listening to your presentation. I was like, okay, oops, angiogenesis. What is that?
Okay, so angiogenesis, as you said, it does sound like a very complicated word. It's a long word. It's got, I don't know, you don't hear it in your daily language. It's a scientific term that relates to the growth of blood vessels in your body. So, for example, if you get a paper cut, your body will do lots of things to heal those wounds. But in your paper cut, some of your blood vessels might get damaged, and angiogenesis is responsible for growing those blood vessels back. At the same time, angiogenesis can be used to cut down blood vessels. So angiogenesis just controls everything blood vessels in your body. And the reason why it ties into cancer and my topic so much, you're like, okay, well, blood vessels, cancer, how does that have anything to do with it? Well, as I was doing my research, I found out a very, very crucial aspect to how cancer grows, and that's with angiogenesis. Basically, cancers need angiogenesis, they need blood vessels to grow to serious and lethal sizes because your blood vessels and your blood have oxygen, has food, has nutrients, and everything cells need to grow and for your body to function normally. And basically, angiogenesis, if your blood is supplying a cancer, it feeds the cancer and lets it grow, which is why angiogenesis is so important.
And can we do something about stopping angiogenesis? You already have the answer or not yet?
Well, it's fairly hard at this point in time, and my research tries to. I basically asked myself the same question. I said, "Hey, well, what if we could just prevent angiogenesis? Because if we do that, we basically prevent cancer. Because without food, the cancer can't grow. So I said, okay, well, what if we go into the roots of it? And that was basically what my paper is looking at. Now, I found out very shockingly that a recent discovery made was that angiogenesis is responsible for over 70 major diseases that is affecting over 1 billion people around the world as we speak. And since that's a recent discovery, it's quite shocking to think that such a simple process of your blood vessels growing is putting so many people at risk every day. And so my research, by looking into diet, I tried to look at some of the positive and the negative impacts of angiogenesis through diet to try and reduce it and to try and prevent it. Now, angiogenesis isn't like a disease, so we can't just say, okay, we need to get rid of angiogenesis altogether, but angiogenesis can be controlled. Obviously, you need angiogenesis for your body to function normally, but if you have abnormal or too high levels of angiogenesis, you can just increase your risk of getting cancer.
So we already know something, and that's just the beginning of the research, let's say. And that's also beginning of the podcast. And in the beginning of the podcast, we always have the pub quiz question that you prepared for our listeners. So let's have a look at that, and then we go back to our discussion.
Okay, so your pub quiz question this episode is, how many cancer cells do you think there are in 1 centimeter cubed of cancer tumor?
So, as usual, remember the answer to the question will be revealed at the end of the podcast. So, listen until the end very attentively. But now we come back to the discussion of diet and angiogenesis. So, you mentioned that there are certain types of food that can prevent, help, stop, or however you want to call it. So, before you mention what types of food there are, what's your approach to diet yourself? I mean, a little bit of private discussion, because if you research this, that's one thing. This is the theory. But then are you trying to put it in practice or not?
I personally consider myself to be quite a healthy person. My parents did a good job in making sure that I was eating healthy and staying healthy. And I was limited quite a lot as a child with soda drinks and McDonald's and all those fast food places. So obviously I got to eat some of those, but I was I was raised with a fairly healthy approach. And it's something that I continue to look out for myself. Now, I have to be completely honest here. My research hasn't been thorough enough to make huge amounts of changes, because what I found out is that it's much harder to have a healthy diet to combat angiogenesis, and it's much easier to eat to increase angiogenesis and increase cancer risks. And what we'll find out is that a lot of that has to do with fat foods and unhealthy foods. So, I mean, I have reduced my very fat food consumption, but I'm still fairly young and I still have a bit of flexibility with that.
Yeah, that's the good thing. You can say, I still have time, I'll think about it tomorrow, like Scarlett O'Hara.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go to the gym next week. It's okay.
Control your parents, right? It's like, remember my research? What are you eating
Yeah,
here? You can play it back
definitely.
on them right now. Before they were limiting your food, now they can like, oh, remember. No wine,
Yeah.
please, or whatever else it is, right? But yeah, of course, I mean, this is no rocket science, if you want, right? It's clear
Mhm.
from many different angles that fatty food is probably not the best for our health, right, and all that. But at the same time, it's
Mhm.
great because it's yet another argument for which we should be careful, because it's related to angiogenesis as such, and can help then lead to certain cancers not growing or whatever. But there is also another thing. Before we continue with the food, I just thought that I wanted to ask you this. The problem, what I understood from your research and in general, is that, okay, we stop the blood vessel from growing. Let's say the cancer doesn't have a way to feed itself, but then
Mhm.
we can have metastasis, right? So we will have to stop it somewhere else. What's going to happen then? How do you understand it?
I think it's good to take a bit of an approach. So first, to define metastasis. Metastasis happens at a later cancer stage when the tumor is already fairly big. And metastasis is when some of the tumor cells, the cancer cells in the tumor, can leave the tumor, go into your bloodstream, and can travel into your body to form secondary tumors. Now, cancer is so serious because it's in those late stages where cancer is spreading and it's already out of control that it's diagnosed, because you'll see like a lump on your chest, and a cancer is very big if it's already a lump on your chest or something. So it's in those late stages that cancer is detected. So I talked about earlier how angiogenesis feeds the cancer. Now, when cancer tumors are small at the beginning, because your body can get cancer tumors. You'd be surprised, cancers can be quite frequent in humans, and usually your body has defenses to take care of them so that they don't get out of control. But sometimes your body will miss a cancer, and that cancer will start to grow. But if it doesn't have blood vessels, angiogenesis, it can't have food and nutrients, so it will really stay tiny, 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 because it just doesn't have the resources. Like you know what they say about kids: you can't grow without soup, you can't feed a cancer without oxygen or without its food. But when it does get angiogenesis, when it does get blood vessels and it does get its food, then that's when cancer will multiply super quickly and get completely out of control. Now it's at those late stages that metastasis starts to happen, and it's at those late stages where they're detected, as I said, because when you have a small tumor, it's isolated and it's like dormant, so nothing can really happen. You won't get metastasis.
That's a very good explanation. Now I got it. First of all, I know it's metastasis, so sorry for the bad pronunciation. And then secondly, I understand that it's this idea that it only happens when it's big. So it's not going to be like
Yes.
this. I imagined this. I don't know, a person looking for food. Okay, it's not here. I'm going somewhere else. Right? It's
No,
it's
no.
only when it grows and out of control. Let's say that it starts traveling somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. And
Okay.
that's actually quite interesting, because I talked about how cancers are dormant. And so when you have it, statistically, a lot of humans have dormant cancers. For example, I don't want to frighten you, but probably you and I right now have some forms of very, very tiny cancers that are less than a millimeter thick, or in volume, that that most likely in your neck and chest that don't have access to blood vessels and stuff that will just stay there until you die, non-threatening. They'll just be dormant. They'll be there. And the older you get, the higher chances you are of developing these tumors just that are dormant, but also the higher chances you are of getting a tumor that is near blood vessels that can have angiogenesis affecting them, which is also why you see older people having cancer more than younger people.
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question, but I just thought about it. So if you're saying there are some dormant cancers, should we actually try to do something about them or not?
Well, if they're dormant and they're not in a serious position, then there's no need. It's just like a sack of cells in your body that will just sit there. They don't have oxygen or nutrients to undergo mitosis and to replicate. And there's no white blood cells to attack it. But if they're so small and insignificant, then there's no reason in trying to combat them because they're not doing anything. Now, what we can do though is which is my research paper, is we can monitor our diet, because if those small tumors are close to important organs or rich blood supplies, then if you have an abnormal rate of angiogenesis caused by your diet, then there is a chance that those blood vessels can reach those cells just by accident, and then that cancer can go out of control. Which in that case, you would need medical assistance to stop it. But otherwise, it's not something we should be very worried about. And I said that if it's close to organs, it's when it can get serious. That's also why we associate cancer to main organs. For example, brain cancer, liver cancer, esophagus cancer, stomach cancer, they're all near vital organs where there needs to be a lot of blood. And where there is lots of blood, there can be lots of angiogenesis, which can feed tumors if they just happen to have mutated there.
Again, very clear. But now coming back to the diet, because I wanted to go back to this. So, I don't want to give solutions like, now you're going to be healthy until whatever, but there are certain foods clearly that are good and certain ones that are bad. So can you tell us something more? What has the research been focusing on right now? What do we know?
Okay, so I just want to say right away that it's very hard to approach diet in general, because everything you eat is made up of hundreds and hundreds of different things. And when you eat a meal, you're ingesting so many things as well. But through my research, I have found some dietary factors that you can eat, and I'll explain in a second how they can reduce angiogenesis and reduce cancer risk. So I chose 3 dietary factors based on a scientist's research called Dr. William Lee. And I chose an isoflavone called genistein and 2 polyphenols called resveratrol and ellagic acid. Now, again, those sound like hard and complex science words, but resveratrol is something that you find in red wine or red grapes. Ellagic acid is something that you find in all kinds of berries, like blueberries, strawberries, and genistein is something that you find in soy. And so I just picked those because I knew that there had been research conducted on them, because they're natural products. For example, grapes are plants, berries are plants, so is soy. And what I found out is when you look at their molecular structure, so if you put out their molecular structure, which unfortunately you can't see because this is a podcast, what you'll see in all of the dietary factors I just explained is that they have these hexagon-looking things attached to them called phenyl functional groups, which is just part of their molecular, I don't know, it's just what they're made out of. And my research showed me that when those are ingested, digested, and then put into the bloodstream, they reduce some of the proteins, the protein levels that are responsible for angiogenesis to occur. So if you have a glass of red wine a day, the resveratrol will go into your bloodstream at the end of the day, and it will reduce the proteins that allow your blood vessels to grow, which reduces angiogenesis. So you could technically say that that having a glass of red wine a day is good for you, as a lot of scientists and papers have already shown.
Technically, of course, you're
Yes.
you're putting that. It's just in case somebody brings it. Because before I mentioned you should be telling your parents not to drink wine. So technically, parents, it's okay. One glass of red wine, to be precise.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. But then wait a second. I still want to understand one more thing before we focus on the other types of food. You're saying it's good to reduce angiogenesis, but then it's also good to have angiogenesis, because you said, like, if you cut yourself, I mean, you need that. So that
Absolutely.
reduction, what kind of reduction are we talking about? Is it going to be only aiming at the bad angiogenesis? No, it's going to go for the whole angiogenesis in our body, or
Yes.
not?
Yeah, it does lead to a complete reduction. So it's like I said at the beginning, angiogenesis isn't a good or a bad process that happens in your body. It's just part of how your body functions. And when I talk about angiogenesis, your body, in most cases, unless there's a certain disease that already has low angiogenesis, when your body is able to sustain itself and fix wounds and heal cuts when it needs to. So what we're talking about when we're reducing angiogenesis is reducing the baseline, because angiogenesis, when it needs to, can grow as much to a certain level, and it can shrink to a certain level, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the human body, and while it can do incredible things, blood vessels can only grow so far. So even if we're shrinking the base level of angiogenesis in the body through these dietary factors, when needed, the body should still be able to grow back to its maximum potential if it ever needs that in a specific area. And just because you have a cut doesn't mean blood vessels will be growing everywhere in your body like crazy. It will just focus on the cut, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Absolutely. Okay. So you mentioned, once again, to summarize, the grapes, glass of wine, berries, soybeans. But there is a problem with discussion of diet, you mentioned as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, the data you were focusing on was from the US only, right?
Yes.
So, of course, we have to take into consideration the diet in the US, and the ethnicity, and a lot of different factors that, we just need more research, right? It's not something, we're not trying to
Absolutely.
say here, this is it, we found the golden grail or whatever else, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Holy grail. Sorry.
So, first of all, I want to make it clear that drinking abnormal levels of red wine isn't good for you either, because what is also clear with cancer is that alcohol, or too much alcohol, can also cause cancer as well. So, a glass of wine a day is good, but too much can lead to liver failure and then cancer. But back to the question that you asked. With regards to the United States, I chose the United States simply because they had the most data. I looked at a lot of countries. I looked at Russia, I looked at Japan, Brazil, I looked at Canada, France as well. So I looked at lots of countries that would have a lot of fairly high populations and would be fairly high in their research as well, especially their medical research. And unfortunately, finding data on liver cancer, let alone how these dietary factors affect liver cancer, was very hard, because we're really focusing in on one really tiny aspect of cancer now. And it just so happened that the United States was the country that had this sort of data, which allowed me to research this more. Now, this research is fairly new. Like I said, the discovery of angiogenesis being at the root of all these diseases is fairly new. So there's a lot of new research being done in this field, and I'm sure in a few years from now, a lot of countries will be picking up on reducing angiogenesis and finding ways to lower that, because we can tackle all of these diseases at the same time. And just so far, it's just the US that I found data on.
This is interesting what you're saying, because we always talk about having so much data on everything. But of course, I mean, if it's so specialized, and it has to be open, first of all, so openly available. And then
Mhm.
secondly, of course, it has to be a country that has researched that particular idea, right? So it's good, but
Yeah,
it's a good idea to start from. And then, if, as you're saying, people pick up on that subject, there'll be more data, more people working on it, we definitely will know more as well. But just coming back to the whole idea of data and bias in data and all that, because it's
yes,
something that really interests me, because we often talk about this, that when we teach at schools, when we have new generations growing, not all of the young people know how to tell the difference between fake stuff and good stuff, and then just biased and biased data. There are
absolutely.
people who just search something and just don't look where they got it from, or whatever. How did you actually know, all right, this is how I get the data, this is how I should look for it?
Well, I can definitely agree that this day and age is definitely something where we need to watch out what kind of data we're taking in. For example, my sister was talking to me and asking me questions. Hey, how do I know if what I'm reading right now is real or fake? So for my research paper, something that the school and especially my teacher wanted me to focus on was this: how I was going to research this paper and how I was going to move forward with it. And so what we basically did was we sort of outlined a sort of methodology that I would follow. So I'd use the same search engines, the same keywords, and the same strategies to get data that's as unbiased as possible and data that's also reliable. And so I used the CDC and the WHO, as well as published papers in renowned universities that were known to be reliable, such as Harvard, Yale, just a few to mention. And the keywords that I chose were, I'll give a few examples, such as liver cancer, the United States. I put the 3 dietary factors: resveratrol, ellagic acid, genistein. So I used a lot of keywords, and I also narrowed the time period that I was taking data for as much as possible. So I only used data from papers from 2000, for the year 2000 to 2021, because since I said this is such a new discovery, the chances that data would be found on this at a later stage would be fairly rare, if not non-existent. So I stuck to those time slots, and I also chose to use longitudinal and short-term studies just to have some broad data.
This is great. This exactly explains how we should approach that, I think. But I have to ask, because you started with this. My sister asked me, how do I know if it's fake or not? What did you tell her?
Well, she wasn't asking me to actually get the answer, because she had taken a class at school, or a small study at school, which sort of tells you. And she was coming more to me and sort of quizzing me and saying,
Ah,
Skye, so
good.
how do you know if what I'm reading is real or fake? And she showed me this test online that you can take, where you read an article and you say, this, and it asks you, do you think this is real or fake? But at this point, I don't think you actually do know a lot of the time whether data is real or fake, because data can be very easily manipulated and published. And unless that data is either followed up in a secondary experiment by a different party, or if you trust the data too much, it can just be unreliable if it has been tampered with or changed. But since it's so hard to distinguish whether it's been changed or not, it's very hard to know if it's real or fake, which is why I tried to use sources that were renowned for being unbiased and renowned to come from fairly reliable sources, such as universities, which are known to have a certain level of integrity when it comes to research.
Yeah, this is a very good guideline, I would say, right? I mean, always look at your sources and question a lot, because yeah, I think it's a good summary as well to say that we can just only hope that what we are reading is true, and we should also maybe stop always supposing it's fake. I mean, because if you get into that kind of a mindset, you're not going to get anywhere. But for sure, sources once again, are very important universities. Always look for data there rather than, just some website that your friend sent you with some shocking headline and whatever else, right? Because especially
Hmm.
nowadays, unfortunately, journalism is often about that. We don't have time to check everything. Although we should, and we know this is terrible, but at the same time, we want to be first, we want to be second, we want to inform. We can't go everywhere, we can't do everything, and there is so much happening that sometimes we just misinform. And yeah, that's the way it is. We have to accept that in some way or another. Okay, we are slowly heading towards the end of our discussion, so I think it's time to reveal the answer to the question. But first of all, if you can repeat it once again, and then if you can give us the answer.
Okay, so the question was how many cancer cells there were in 1 centimeter cubed of cancer tumor. The answer is 100 million cancer cells in only 1 centimeter cubed of tumor.
This is crazy. Listeners can't see my face right now and the big eyes I've made, but I would have never guessed that. How did you find it out?
Well, you came to me with the pub quiz question, and I wanted to. My initial thought for the pub quiz was to see how many dormant cancers are in the body on average, but I couldn't find data on that. So I thought of something maybe more simple, maybe more intriguing. And when I looked up how many cancer cells there were, it was actually quite shocking to myself to see such a high number. So I said, "Great, this is good."
Absolutely. Were they saying that this is on average, or what was the data? Like, how was it described? How do we know?
It is on average, but cancers tend to be fairly compact to be as close as possible to blood vessels. So, which is probably why there is such a high number as well.
I'm just thinking about the other question. Sorry, I can't help it, but that would have been a great question too, for sure. So maybe your
Yeah.
research for next year, I don't know, at university already, or whatever else you're
Mhm.
planning to do. I have to ask you because yeah, when we were discussing behind the scenes, you told me you're preparing for your exams and everything. Do you have already in mind where you're gonna go after that, after school?
Right now, I'm definitely going down the science path. I've applied to a few universities in Canada with related science. I've been admitted into McGill for chemistry, and I've been admitted into biochemistry for the University of Toronto. I'm still waiting on one university option, which is McGill Biochemistry. It's a very competitive program, and I really, really hope I get in because that is definitely my first choice. So yeah, that's where I'm really going toward with the universities. But to be honest, I don't think I would have been able to get as far with universities with my research paper if it wasn't for my biology teacher Tess Charnot. She was the one that was my supervisor when I wrote the paper, and a lot of credit has to go to her as well for supporting my research paper and the research I had to do to write this and the competitions I've entered because of it. She just finished submitting her thesis for her doctorate, and she's soon going to have her viva voce at her university. So all the best to her for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is so great you mentioned that. I mean, it's possible to get far without such a support from a teacher, but very often there is somebody who inspires you, somebody who roots for you, who helps, who you can go to. And it's good you're saying that because, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sure that some of the participants of the contest I mentioned have done it themselves, and just kudos to them. That's really difficult, but the teachers behind our works are always
Mhm.
great to mention. So it's good you're saying that.
Yeah.
But
No, I definitely couldn't have done this without her. No chance.
I hope she's listening, and I'm sure she's very very proud of you for sure, and others that she's been inspiring. I'm sure you're not the only one. Coming back to the university, I just wanted to say that once you get to the dream McGill and you get everything, just come back to Luxembourg, okay? So because I want to sell the country, right? I don't know what you feel about it and whatever, but it's brilliant. There is a FNR fellowship you can apply to after you've studied, and we need people like you. So just don't forget about the place where you lived, because for sure would be great once you are back to talk once again on the podcast about what you're doing here in Luxembourg in your research.
Yes, we'll see some of the research that I do in university, but there always comes a time though when after you've lived in a place for so long that you kind of get a little bit sick of it and you really want to go and explore, especially as a young person. So we'll have to see.
Absolutely. I understand that as well. It's better to go and explore, but then, it's definitely something that I often say, that it's a very nice research atmosphere here and a lot of opportunities. So as we are growing in that field, don't forget as an option afterwards, after you've already explored, to maybe come back. But if anybody is interested, I wanted to mention that as well, and wants to contact you or just discuss what you've done, or you has some any suggestions how they can contact you.
I have a Hotmail account, which is aside from my school. And if you email me there, if you have any questions on my research, or I'm really looking to find some connections in the science field, I'm very eager to do more research and to have as many opportunities as I can possibly have. So if you think my research is interesting now, you can get to me at happyskyb@hotmail.com. And it's Skye with an E at the end.
And if anything, if you have a problem with that, you can always contact me and I'm going to forward this to you as well, so that you get informed. Yes, we have to mention also maybe the contest a little bit, because we haven't talked about it. And I just wanted to finish on that note, because I think this is something that we should talk about a little, just because I don't think everybody knows about it. And I found out about it about a year or two ago. And I think it's a great opportunity for youngsters to try something, meet great people as well, because I can see you're enjoying yourself there. It's a great atmosphere, great vibe between the people there. So the organization that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast is the Young Scientist organization, Young Forscher, if you want. And what they do is, among many different things, they also organize this contest for the best research papers. And that's how you entered and got the award and everything else.
Yeah, it's not just the research papers. I think it's a really brilliant organization in Luxembourg. It basically invites young children, I think as early as 11 years old, to university levels to come present their research. And it's not just science. There's also math related, physics related. There's one guy that brought in a whole Rubik's Cube robot that he had built.
Yes, I'm planning to talk to him. I hope I manage.
Great. But yeah, it's really a place where lots of young scientists can just come and show their ideas in front of experts. And and I think Luxembourg is really good for that, to be able to compete on national levels right away and be exposed to something like that. Especially at such a young age, it can really improve and increase the enthusiasm in young scientists nowadays. So my biology teacher, Miss Charnot, is always encouraging it to her students. And I think it should be encouraged to all the young scientists in Luxembourg.
Yes, and I also know that the organization always says there is no bad idea. So they don't suggest it. They don't say, okay, this is what you should do. You can come to them and say, like, that's my interest. And they're going to support you. So this is also great, and it's from the side of the research itself, but also the community that is around it, and the fact, as you mentioned, you also learn to present, to be on a stage, to exchange information. All this is brilliant. So yes, whoever that could participate, please encourage. And if ever you need any information, it's also going to be in the show notes. And with that, I really thank you, Skye, today for joining me and telling a little bit about angiogenesis and cancer and your research. And please remember, if ever you come back, to contact us so we can talk about your current work in Luxembourg. Thank you very much.
Great, will do. Thank you so much for having me.
This is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. When we hit the stop button, we realized with Skye that we forgot to talk about the negative types of food when it comes to angiogenesis. If you're interested, I encourage you to do your own research or just contact Skye, as he will be very happy to discuss this with you. And of course, as well, don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, to check what we have to say on Twitter and other media where we are present. Write me, suggest new guests, and just share whichever information you have to share. Thank you very much. This was Skye and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.